Alright, buckle up. If you think the world's just going mad by accident, I've got some news for you. This descent into mass mental illness isn't some random cosmic event. It's the predictable, slow-motion car crash fueled by our very own modern culture. It's got everything from identity politics to social media and a therapy industry that seems more intent on keeping us broken than helping us heal. Today we're going to take a good, hard look at why everyone's losing the plot, with no holds barred. Spoiler alert, if you feel a little attacked, it's because the truth hurts. The Trojan horse of self-help and therapy. First off, let's talk about how the therapy culture has slipped into society as the friendly Trojan horse of self-help. On the surface, therapy sounds great. It's supposed to help you get in touch with your feelings, right? But in reality, what it's mostly done is create an entire generation hooked on emotional validation, to the point where every minor inconvenience becomes a trauma, and every emotion is something to be coddled and explored. Instead of building resilience, modern therapy has turned people into emotional tourists, wandering around with a checklist of issues they need to obsess over. With barely a thought of whether these obsessions are actually helpful, it's like an endless buffet of emotional wallowing where people keep going back for another round of victimhood. The more people feel broken, the more therapists and wellness gurus line their pockets. Follow your feelings until you're miserable. One of the biggest modern mantras is follow your feelings. Sounds liberating, right? Wrong. What it's done is create a society that's stuck in a permanent toddler phase. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Feelings change more often than the weather, and if you're using them as your moral compass, don't be surprised when you end up lost in the woods. Modern spirituality too latched onto this emotional fixation, selling it as a revolutionary alternative to traditional religious values. But here's the kicker. These spiritual ideas that claim to be radical alternatives to religions like Christianity or Buddhism actually have roots in values they criticize, values like discipline and integrity, which have since been tossed in the bin. The social media circus, instant validation, endless comparison. Social media, the virtual gladiator pit of validation where we're all competing for likes and clout, which, let's face it, is just our desperate bid for approval disguised as self-expression. Instead of fostering actual self-worth, social media feeds us an endless stream of people telling us how messed up they are, which, believe it or not, only makes us feel more justified in our own chaotic misery. And this would all be funny if it weren't for the fact that this echo chamber of dysfunction has real-world consequences. Social media takes all of these emotional indulgences and puts them on blast for everyone to see, creating a never-ending competition of who's struggling the hardest. Identity politics dividing and conquering the masses. Then there's identity politics, the gift that keeps on giving, or rather taking. Here's a shocker. Constantly putting people in neatly defined boxes and reducing them to labels doesn't lead to unity or understanding. It leads to paranoia, hostility, and an obsession with every slight, real or imagined. In a world where we're all being told that our identity is the most important thing, we're bound to become fragile and insecure because there's no room for nuance or change. Identity politics also give people a convenient excuse to play the victim, forever pointing fingers at oppressive forces instead of ever taking responsibility. Every frustration becomes someone else's fault. It's no wonder we're witnessing what's essentially an assembly line of mental breakdowns. The addiction to victimhood, why no one wants to be happy anymore. This might sound controversial, but it needs to be said. We've reached a point where being unhappy and unstable is almost trendy. It's not just accepted, it's glorified. Between the therapy industrial complex, social media influencers pushing self-pity as relatable content, and identity politics stoking the fires of resentment, we've made mental illness fashionable. People wear their struggles like badges of honor, claiming uniqueness while conforming to a predictable, depressing template. The worst part? Yeah, it's all become normalized. You'll see people post things like, "We're all struggling and that's okay," as if constant misery is some rite of passage to enlightenment. Don't get me wrong, empathy is important, but glorifying emotional instability is something else entirely. And the result? We're all encouraged to stay locked in a loop of helplessness because it's just the way things are. The solution they don't want you to hear: integrity and self-reliance. Here's a radical idea. Maybe the answer isn't to sink further into emotional chaos. Maybe, just maybe, we need to stop treating every mood swing as a profound revelation. Instead of endlessly chasing comfort and indulgence, how about working on integrity, resilience, and, hold on to your hats, a stable sense of self? Shocking, I know. Modern society isn't too keen on this idea, When was the last time you saw someone on Instagram preaching self-reliance or discipline? You're more likely to find someone trying to sell you on their latest trauma or emotional struggle. But the truth is, building a stable identity, one rooted in consistent values and not every whim or new belief system, gives you the strength to withstand the chaos that modern culture throws at you. The bottom line, get out of the pit. To sum it up, if you're tired of feeling like you're barely hanging on, there's a way out. You don't have to be chained to every feeling or identity label that social media or society throws at you. You don't have to define yourself by struggle or constantly search for validation online. Real freedom comes from a strong, stable identity, which isn't built overnight but is definitely worth the effort. And if you want to avoid becoming yet another casualty of this modern mental illness epidemic, it might be time to look for meaning somewhere other than your latest feeling or social media feed. So stop indulging every fleeting emotion, stop blaming society for every frustration, and start building a foundation for yourself that isn't as fickle as today's internet trends. Get some integrity, some resilience, and if you're brave enough, stop following the crowd down this self-destructive spiral. Because honestly, if we don't start fighting against this cultural obsession with victimhood and chaos, we're all going to end up even more miserable than we already are.